The 1955 World Series was one of the most famous World Series of all time. In fact, some of its highlights used to rank among the most famous World Series highlights of all time.
But they're both safe when Skowron loses the ball while tagging Snyder.
In hindsight, it really is amazing just how many of these plays we have forgotten about.
And Sandy Amorous races for the ball, sticks out his glove just in time and makes the catch. And McDougal has rounded second base. He throws to Reese. And Reese's peg to Hodges doubles McDougal at first.
And can you believe that it's been 70 years since the Brooklyn Dodgers finally won the World Series? Now, I've got a little bit of video from the 1955 World Series, including a complete broadcast of the original TV broadcast of Game 1. I've also got high-quality versions of the radio broadcasts of all 7 games. If you want some access to this stuff, go check out the Patreon link in the description down below. But this time, instead of doing just like a traditional highlights video, I want to tell you the story of the 1955 World Series through all of the interconnected storylines that you see. So this is the stuff that you're not going to get looking at the box scores or looking at the play-by-play summary or anything like that. This is also some of the stuff that's a little bit harder to trace back if you go through the hundreds of newspaper articles. So let's get going. In the first game of the 1955 World Series with a 6-3 lead, Billy Martin smacked this triple to deep left field. But then, with a right-handed pitcher on the mound and a left-handed hitter at the plate, Billy did something absolutely insane. Martin attempted to steal home and was thrown out easily.
Martin is coming to the plate. Throw to Campanella. They get him. He's out stealing.
This was a bizarre decision, a bizarre play for so many reasons. I mean, you've got a right-handed pitcher who's throwing out of the stretch. That means he's looking right at the runner on third base. You've got a left-handed hitter at the plate, which means that there's nobody to get in front of the catcher. There were 2 men out, and the 2 teams had already combined for 5 home runs in this game alone. And that's just the sort of World Series that 1955 was. With the score now 6-4, Jackie Robinson found himself on third base with 2 men out in the top of the 8th inning. What happened next is one of the most famous plays in World Series history.
Robbie's coming to the plate. The throw to Berra. He steals it.
Unfortunately, since there was no instant replay back in 1955, this clip from the official World Series video is the best that I can show you. And they're going to be arguing about this play for as long as they play baseball.
On the daring maneuver, but Yogi Berra doesn't think so.
So you're probably wondering what in the world the difference is between Martin's attempt and Robinson's attempt. Well, Robinson had a batter between himself and the catcher, and Whitey Ford, who was the left-handed pitcher, went out of the full stretch. But most importantly of all, Jackie had already stolen home before in 1955, and he'd done so plenty of times before in his career too. So Jackie's first attempt at stealing home in 1955 ended up in failure. The Cubs threw him out of the plate on August 28th. And so, against the Cardinals the very next day, Jackie Robinson repeated the feat, and this time he was called safe. Even though he was at the end of his career, Jackie could still come down that line. So somebody over at Sabre actually did the math. They figured that Robinson had stolen home successfully 19 times in his entire career, not counting that one in the World Series, and he had been caught 12 times. Now that's not the greatest ratio in the world, but then again, most of us would probably have a 0% success rate if we tried it. The problem though is that both teams were hitting home runs in the 1955 World Series like there was no tomorrow. In fact, the 2 teams combined for a whopping 5 home runs in the first game alone and 17 in the entire series combined. This one by Joe Collins was the most famous and provided the Yankees with the slim 1-run margin of victory in the first game. It also provided us with the most famous picture of that World Series. Sure, there were a lot of home runs, and yet this was a World Series of small ball, and it was a World Series of surprise plays. And the winning pitcher in the end was an off-speed pitching specialist. He was a sort of pitcher that you really just don't see in Major League Baseball anymore these days. Now, though it's been 70 years, when you look back at the way that things were, sometimes it feels like this was 7 centuries ago. And we've forgotten all about the little stories that made this World Series great. Take that Billy Martin triple in the 6th inning of Game 1, for example.
Gilliam has to go way back on this one. It's going to be over his head and rolling to the scoreboard. Martin is heading for second. Gilliam up with the ball. Billy's going to third. The relay to Reese. Reese to Robinson, not in time.
Brooklyn manager Walter Alston took Dodger ace pitcher Don Newcombe out right after that triple. This was the last time that Don Newcombe pitched in the 1955 World Series.
It was Besson and Roger Craig who gave the club the lift. And Newcombe goes out.
Newcomb's injury wound up being a crucial factor in the 1955 World Series. Walter Alston had a very difficult time balancing his pitchers without his ace. And as a result of that, only one of Brooklyn's pitchers started more than one game in the entire World Series, which is something that was pretty surprising, especially for 1955. Newcombe was an absolute powerhouse during his years with the Dodgers. In 1954 and 1955, he was just as dangerous with the bat as he was with the ball. Newcombe hit a whopping 7 home runs in 1955, amazing for a pitcher in the middle of the 1950s. But the thing is that Newcombe was hurting, and he actually missed most of the month of September. Now, the Dodgers had already clinched the pennant, of course, but they still had the biggest obstacle to overcome, which was the World Series, the one thing they had never been able to win. So Newcombe's first problem that September was a stomach virus. By Game 4, however, word got out that Newcombe's bigger problem was a sore arm. And so, in the end, Brooklyn's ace pitched only 6 innings in the biggest series in franchise history. So you know what's really crazy about this? Don Newcombe never won a World Series game. He's actually got that in common with Bob Feller. Newcombe started 2 games in 1949 and he lost both. The Dodgers missed out on the 1950 World Series and the 1951 World Series by 1 game each time. Newcombe was in the military in 1952 and 1953. The New York Giants beat out Brooklyn in 1954. And as we just saw, Newcombe lost his only start in the 1955 World Series. He came back in 1956 and pitched Game 7, where the 30-year-old Newcombe gave up 3 home runs before he could get out of the 4th inning, and he never had another chance. And so the Dodgers had a question mark in the pitching column before each World Series game. Youngster Billy Lowe started Game 2 and had an early 1-0 lead. But Billy turned around and gave up 4 runs in the bottom of the 4th inning, the big blow being this single by Yankee pitcher Tommy Byrne. As shaky as this camera is, you can tell what Byrne did here. He just went up the middle of the pitch, nothing fancy. So Tommy Byrne was actually another really interesting story. This is the sort of guy that you normally wouldn't see get a second chance in the major leagues, especially since he was 35 years old. But the 1955 Yankees were desperate for somebody, anybody, and so they brought him up from the minors. Byrne had originally been with the Yankees, of course, as you can see in this 1951 Bowman card. He found himself with the St. Louis Browns before long, though, and that's when his career started to unravel. It must have seemed for a while like he was going to end his career with the Seattle Rainiers of the Pacific Coast League, where he had quite a bit of success in 1954. Stengel took a chance on him early in 1955, though, and it really paid off. And Casey Stengel could have used all of the help that he could get. So we tend to think about the Yankees teams between like 1947 and 1964 as this massive dynasty that was just dominant year in and year out. What we tend to forget is that some of those pennants were really, really hard for the Yankees to win, and 1955 was one of the hardest. On September 8, 1955, the Yankees found themselves in the thick of a 4-team race for the top. By the way, that's the same day that the Brooklyn Dodgers clinched the pennant, the earliest in history up to that time. It got to the point where the American League made arrangements for a potential 4-team playoff. In the end, the biggest series of the season for the Yankees was this 4-game homestand against none other than the Boston Red Sox. And in a stroke of poetic justice, Tommy Byrne threw a 4-hitter to beat Boston and give the Yankees a lead that they never relinquished. Byrne showed that a little bit of old-fashioned strategy could tame even the best hitters. And of course, Tommy also had a little bit of help from his friends. Elston Howard robbed a home run in this one. And so there's no accident that Byrne was able to win Game 2 of the World Series. But then everything in the World Series went back to Brooklyn, and that's where things really started to change. The first big change, of course, was Mickey Mantle, who finally got into the World Series. Mickey had injured his thigh against the Red Sox on September 16th, right in the middle of that crucial pennant stretch. And as crazy as it sounds these days, Mantle pulled his hamstring trying to drag out a bunt for a base hit. Now that's right, Mickey Mantle, the great famous slugger, was actually also a really good bunter. But do you think that the bunt attempt was really worth it? I mean, the Yankees barely won the pennant, and Mickey was out for almost the entire World Series as a result. In fact, the only game that he started was Game 3. And of course, he managed to do something special in his first plate appearance.
Mickey Mantle, the batter. Padres fastball swung on by Mantle. There's a high drive deep into straightaway center field. And there it goes into the center field stands for a home run for Mickey Mantle.
That blast by Mickey Mantle made it a 2-1 Dodger lead, but that was really all that Mantle did in the entire World Series. In fact, in that same game, Mantle managed to end a Yankee rally all by himself.
Mantle, as you know, can swing from either side, and against the left-hander Johnny Padres, he's batting from the right side, holding the bat right on the end. He heaves a big sigh. Padres, in a little jam here with 2 men on, is ready, delivers an overhand curve. There's a ground ball to the left side. Pee Wee Reese has it. Throw to Gilliam for one. The throw to first. It's a double play.
Mantle was only 23 years old at this time, which is hard to believe. He was already a major star. Things would have been a lot different in the series if he had been healthy. Anyway, Brooklyn went on to win the third game 8-3 and then put across 8 runs once again in Game 4, winning that one 8-5. And so, like I told you, as soon as the series went back to Brooklyn, the whole complexion of the thing changed. In the 1955 regular season, the Brooklyn Dodgers had an incredible .727 winning percentage at home. But attendance at Ebbets Field had been steadily declining, while the Braves were setting new attendance records every year in Milwaukee. And so when you think about how great classic Ebbets Field was, you have to remember that the attendance there was pretty lousy in the final years that the Dodgers were in Brooklyn. But it's not that simple. I mean, you know this. It's never that simple. You see, the Dodgers were incredibly popular in the late 1940s. The team drew almost 1,800,000 fans in 1946, and with Jackie Robinson on board, they came tantalizingly close to 2 million in 1947. Starting in 1950, however, the Brooklyn Dodger attendance mysteriously dropped, and while I don't know the exact answer, I can give you a couple of hints. Walter O'Malley, who was once considered the most evil man in all of America, made a move to take over the team in summer 1950. O'Malley duked it out with co-owner Branch Rickey after part owner John L. Smith passed away that summer. While the Dodgers tried their hardest to catch the front-running Phillies in 1950, the Brooklyn newspapers were filled with news about Rickey's coming departure. At the time, it probably didn't seem like a huge deal, but in hindsight, this really was big news. So it wasn't until Branch Rickey was forced out of the club that it became clear just how much friction there was at the top level of Brooklyn Dodger ownership. And before long, Walter O'Malley set on trying to convince the political powers in New York City to let him build a new ballpark on the west end of Brooklyn. O'Malley worked hard to convince Robert Moses, the man who designed the modern form of New York City. And O'Malley made the classic Major League Baseball team demand, give us a new stadium where we want it and how we want it, or we leave town. In the end, Robert Moses won, and the Dodgers left town. Now, we could probably have a long debate about whether Ebbets Field was still suitable for Major League Baseball or not. Sure, it was small. It had a capacity of just under 32,000. But it was still larger than the ballparks in Washington, D.C., and Cincinnati, and Kansas City, which was kind of new to the majors, and St. Louis. And when you do your research, you'll notice that nobody at the time ever even considered renovating Ebbets Field, which seems really bizarre today. So back when it opened in 1913, Ebbets Field was hailed as the most beautiful ballpark in the world. It was a vast improvement over Old Washington Park, which was an old wooden structure that always had a hard time drawing fans. Washington Park's biggest problem was that there were factories across the street that would blow black smoke, soot, and ash into the sky. In other words, this was an awful place to watch a game. In fact, Washington Park was so bad that owner Charles Ebbets had a hard time convincing minor league players to even play for the Brooklyn team. Ebbets had to buy up pieces of the property that would later become Ebbets Field one by one. This was a huge contrast to Walter O'Malley, who basically wanted Robert Moses to just give him the land. Now, it is true that Ebbets Field had horrible parking. There was room for maybe 700 cars, but it was a city ballpark and it was built for access via public transit. This was a Brooklyn park for Brooklynites. And even though it was run down, it was one of the most famous ballparks in the United States in the mid-1950s, and it hosted one of the most popular teams in the entire sport. Plus, the thing is, you have to remember this, it's not like the Brooklyn Dodgers were hurting for money. This is the part that's usually forgotten when this story is told. Walter O'Malley might have been a jerk to the people of Brooklyn, but he certainly understood how to make money. Along with the Giants, the Dodgers led the National League in television revenue by 1955. O'Malley's focus was on revenue from television, not only revenue from attendance, which is something that made him stand out among the other baseball owners. And after all, if there really were over 2 million people watching every Brooklyn Dodgers game on television, it's clear that TV is really where the focus should have been. So O'Malley's grand idea was to create a dome stadium that would have artificial turf. It was sort of like an early version of what eventually became the Astrodome. That would have meant abandoning all of the eccentricities and all of the small joys that could be found at Ebbets Field. And to make his plan a reality, he had to figure out a way to make a strong political case for his new plan. Stories have come down over the years of fights and near riots at Ebbets Field, though this was pretty common in ballgames in New York up until the modern era of high ticket prices. The ever-changing ethnic mix of Brooklyn might have scared some people off from the games, though you have to remember that Black and Latino people can also attend games, of course. And actually, when you really dig in, it seems that the problem was less racial and more sabotage in hopes of getting a brand new stadium. For example, one Dodger fan from those days recalled facing an impossible task trying to get quality seats, even when huge sections of the ballpark were still available. There were also stories of the team overselling general admission seats for the big games. Of course, this is back when stadiums still had general admission, something that we haven't seen in baseball now for decades. And in the end, the diehard fans frequently wound up with box seats further away from the action than the cheap bleacher seats that didn't sell at all. Anyway, there isn't much more than this circumstantial evidence that indicates that O'Malley deliberately tried to tank attendance in hopes of winning a new stadium side. But, of course, we know that other sports owners have done the exact same thing countless times in countless other cities over the decades. And in the end, O'Malley got the Los Angeles market that he wanted as a consolation prize. But he didn't get that before Brooklyn got its winner. Brooklyn relied on the long ball again in Game 5, staking out an early lead.
There's a high drive to deep right. That ball is going.
Duke Snider in particular had a tremendous game in Game 5, and you can see here just how much that early television camera struggled to capture the action. This home run was his fourth of the series, putting him only one away from the record set by the immortal Babe Ruth. But the Brooklyn Dodgers of 1955 did have a weakness. It had a weak pitching staff. It's almost impossible to believe today, but like I said, the Dodgers basically gave up their entire pitching rotation for the 1955 series. The 7 games were started by 6 different pitchers. Only one pitcher managed to start more than one game. As I mentioned earlier, ace starter Don Newcombe was pitching with a shoulder injury and didn't appear after Game 1. Billy Lowe's had started Game 2, but was taken out after giving up 4 runs in the 4th, including that base hit to pitcher Bob Turley. Young changeup specialist Johnny Padres overcame that Mickey Mantle home run in Game 3 to throw a complete game, which is something that the Dodger bullpen needed desperately. And then in Game 4, Carl Erskine barely got out of the 3rd inning before he had to be taken out as well. Now, as you might know, the Brooklyn Dodgers did have a powerful left-handed pitcher waiting in the wings, one of the most famous pitchers of all time, but he didn't make an appearance in the 1955 World Series at all. That was Sandy Koufax, of course. That was the kid from Brooklyn who looked great from the very beginning. Koufax became a star while he pitched for the University of Cincinnati in 1954, and he attracted a lot of major league attention. During the winter of 1954, Koufax signed a contract with the Dodgers for the major league minimum plus a big bonus. And that bonus put Sandy Koufax in the bonus baby territory. Yeah, we should talk about this bonus baby rule since it's kind of key to understanding baseball in the 1950s. So the rule was that any amateur player who was signed for a bonus above a certain threshold, probably something like $10,000, had to stay on the major league roster for 2 years, even if you never played him. This was a bizarre rule, completely Byzantine, but I'll tell you why they did it. Honestly, the blame goes to Dick Wakefield. So back in summer 1941, Wakefield was setting records left and right for the University of Michigan and had every single major league club knocking his door down. Wakefield signed with the Tigers and received a $45,000 bonus. In the end, Wakefield went down to the minor leagues where he stayed for years, and all of the hype wound up being for nothing. And so the major league owners decided to create this bonus baby rule. I suspect that the fact that Wakefield went to the Detroit Tigers probably had something to do with it. If he had gone to New York, maybe there's no bonus baby rule. Anyway, the whole idea behind this rule was to create a disincentive to prevent teams from signing another Wakefield. In practice, though, all it did was cause teams to hold players like Sandy Koufax on the major league roster without actually playing him. And so a bunch of very promising young players saw their careers destroyed because they spent 2 years not playing at all. However, ignoring the bonus rule was even worse. Right before the 1954 season, the Dodgers signed a kid named Roberto Clemente who looked pretty good. Clemente went straight to Montreal despite the fact that his bonus made him subject to that bonus baby rule. And so, at the end of the 1954 season, the Pittsburgh Pirates were able to sign the 19-year-old Clemente on the waiver wire for only $4,000. So could you imagine how good the Dodgers would have been in 1955 if they had Clemente in left field instead of like Sandy Amoros or whoever it was? Anyway, the Dodgers were not going to let a kid like Koufax go that route. Though Koufax didn't pitch in the 1955 World Series, the Dodgers did have other kids straight from the minors who did what they could. Roger Craig had just finished a 2-year military stint when he was assigned to Montreal in early 1954. Despite a slow start, Craig was soon cruising along with a 10-2 record and looked to be good enough to play for the big league team. Though he got in a bit of trouble because of his control, Craig started and won the 5th game of the World Series, giving the Dodgers a 3-2 series lead. And then the Brooklyn Dodgers had another phenomenal youngster waiting in the wings for Game 6. This was Carl Spooner. So you'll probably skip over him when you come across his baseball reference page, but there was a time when Carl Spooner was the most promising young pitcher in the entire Dodger organization. While pitching in Pueblo, Colorado in 1953, Spooner pitched a no-hitter, striking out a whopping 13 batters. Spooner had a great fastball and fantastic stuff, though his problem was his control. That sounds a lot like Sandy Koufax, right? Well, while Sandy Koufax was being courted by the Brooklyn Dodger scouts, Spooner was making his major league debut in September 1954. It was too late, though, for the pennant race. And the headline here says it all after Spooner struck out 15 New York Giants in his major league debut. These were the first-place New York Giants. This was the team that would go on to win the World Series that year. And everybody thought that Spooner was going to be the next Walter Johnson. So I want you to think about Carl Spooner the next time you hear something about some can't-miss kid who throws the ball 110 miles an hour. The truth is that we've had kids like this throughout the entire history of baseball. Most of them wind up throwing their arms off before they can ever even do anything. The ones that make it in the long term are the ones who actually learn how to pitch instead of just trying to, overpower everybody. And no, your modern day metrics are not going to teach you that lesson. You need to actually learn the history of the sport. Spooner hurt his arm in spring training in 1955, likely because he tried to pitch too many fastballs without properly warming up. He came back eventually, though, and pitched 6 innings of relief the day that the Dodgers won the pennant. Now, Spooner started Game 6 of the World Series, but his control got him into trouble in the bottom of the first. In hindsight, Spooner had a bit of bad luck. Gilliam just barely missed getting this ground ball that would have been a double play and would have ended the inning. And the Yankees sure knew how to take advantage of little opportunities.
While Berra stops at second.
The big blow was this Texas League pop fly by Moose Skowron that somehow exited the stadium.
And Berra and Bauer score ahead of him, and the Yankees have a 5-0 lead.
Spooner didn't even get out of the inning, and the Dodgers lost the game 5-1. Now, if you know anything about the long and storied history of the Brooklyn Dodgers, you know that this sort of thing was to be expected. For some reason or other, the Dodgers were always snake-bitten, even when the team was playing well. Way back in the winter of 1898, the Brooklyn Superbas bought their way to success. The Brooklyn and Baltimore teams shared the same owners, and the good Oriole players were all moved up to Brooklyn. Sure, Brooklyn clinched the pennant in 1899, but nobody bothered to go to the pennant-clinching game. And despite the fact that Brooklyn repeated as pennant winners in 1900, attendance was so bad that there were credible rumors of the team just up and moving to Washington, D.C. So maybe their curse came because they stole all of the good players from Baltimore? I'm honestly not sure. But the team somehow managed to stay in Brooklyn and eventually moved into majestic Ebbets Field, which was always a better ballpark than Washington Park ever was. But when the Dodgers would win, they would still find a way to lose. Brooklyn just managed to pull off a pennant in 1916, despite the New York Giants winning 26 straight games in September to make it really close. But then they ran into a really good Red Sox team during the World Series, led by a young pitcher named Babe Ruth. And in the 1920 World Series, the Cleveland Indians beat the Dodgers on an unassisted triple play, still the only one in World Series history. And that brought about the era of the Daffiness Boys. You know which era I'm talking about. This is the era of the immortal Babe Herman. And a lot of the best stories in baseball history come from Brooklyn in the 1920s and 30s. There was never another player quite like Babe Herman, and that's probably a good thing. Herman was the trailing runner that time in 1926 when the Dodgers wound up with 3 runners on third base, a play that we've never seen the likes of since. In May 1930, Herman somehow managed to be passed on the base paths when Del Basante hit a home run. Then, in September 1930, the same season, it happened again. This time it was Glenn Wright hitting the home run. So those were the days where you really didn't know what you were going to see when you went to the ballpark, especially if the Dodgers were playing. But somehow the Dodgers managed to start winning and winning and winning. By 1939, the Dodgers had a team that really could compete. Famed cartoonist Willard Mullen created the Brooklyn Bum with this drawing, noting that the Dodgers just seemed out of place among National League royalty in 1939. By 1941, however, Dem Bums were the toast of the National League, winning 100 games and getting to the World Series for the first time in 21 years. But in Game 4 of that World Series, with 2 men out in the top of the 9th inning, the daffiness struck again.
3-2 pitch, 2 out in the 9th inning. Casey gets by Henrik, it's all over. Pitcher starting his windup out there again. He's all ready now. Watch it, here it comes. He swung, fouled the ball. He swung at the ball and missed it. The ball gets away from the catcher, and Henrik goes to first. And now let's see whether the umpire is going to decide he fouled it or whether it was a clean strike. The umpire says that Henrik swung, it was a clean strike. The ball got away from the catcher, and so Henrik is entitled to first because he got there ahead of the throw.
So the Yankees had been down to their final strike with nobody on base. A Dodger victory would have tied the series at 2 games each. Instead, Tommy Henrik reached first base, then Joe DiMaggio singled, Charlie Keller doubled, and the Yankees wound up scoring 4 runs. They won that game and then won the game the next afternoon, and the series was over, only in Brooklyn. While the origins of the phrase "wait till next year" are disputed, the Brooklyn Eagle makes it pretty clear. The 1941 World Series is what made that phrase popular. Brooklyn won 104 games in 1942, but it wasn't enough to overtake the St. Louis Cardinals. After World War II, the Cardinals and Dodgers went to a 3-game playoff in 1946, but St. Louis won. Brooklyn broke up a no-hit attempt by Bill Bevins in Game 4 of the 1947 World Series. In the end, though, the Yankees won that series in 7 games. So there's something about coming really close but not quite making it that turns ordinary fans into rabid fanatics for a team. And the Dodgers were certainly capable of coming really close but not being quite close enough. Brooklyn finished just short in 1948. Then in 1949, the Dodgers won the pennant at the very end of the season but lost the World Series to the Yankees, once again, in 5 games. And then came 1950. Though the Philadelphia Phillies started the season strong, Brooklyn came back to tie them, setting up a showdown with Philadelphia at home on the last day of the season. Don Newcombe, of course, was on the mound for the Dodgers, and he pitched well. Duke Snider came up in the bottom of the 9th inning with 2 men on and nobody out and a chance to win it.
Score tied 1-1, and what represents the winning run is the second baseman Abrams. The infield moves in to look for the bunt. Snider steps in. 2 grounders to the pitcher, and he ran into his own ball for 0 for 3. Robert stretches. So, Snider takes full cut. Line drive to center field. Ashburn races in with the ball. Here comes the throw from center field. He is out!
And then in the top of the 10th, the Phillies found a way to break Brooklyn's heart.
1 ball, 2 strikes. Now Newcombe is set. In the stretch, delivering. Swinging a fly very, very deep toward left field. Moving back, Abrams, way, way back. He can't get it. It's a home run. A home run for Dick Sisler.
Well, it doesn't get much closer than that, does it? Well, it turns out that these Dodgers found themselves in the same situation once again in 1951. Brooklyn had a 13-game lead on August 11th, 1951. By the end of the season on September 30th, the Giants had come all the way back, forcing that famous 3-game playoff. And this time it was Ralph Branca's turn to lose it.
Branca has that tremendous overarm sinker curve that drops down. Then he has a roundhouse hook curve to right-hand batters by way of third. Extremely effective against right-handed. 2 pitchers in the Dodgers bullpen now. I think one of them's Roll. Here's Bobby waiting. Branca throws. Bobby swings. That's a long line drive. The left going. Goal to chance. Win the pennant.
So I guess you could say that the Brooklyn Dodgers were kind of like the Boston Red Sox, right? Remember with, the 75 World Series, 1978, 1986, and so on. Except it was like something like 1978 was happening basically every single year to the Dodgers, and it just never ended. The Dodgers had a 3-2 series lead in 1952 and were back home in Ebbets Field for the last 2 games. But Mickey Mantle crushed this pitch to give the Yankees a victory in Game 6.
Left center field. It's way out there. It's way out there, and it is in there. I mean, it's in there.
And Billy Martin made this incredible catch in Game 7 to help preserve a 4-2 Yankee victory.
It's a high pop-up. Who's going to get it? Here comes Billy Martin digging hard, and he makes the catch at the last second.
So Brooklyn was stronger than ever in 1953. The 53 Dodgers are often considered one of the greatest teams in National League history. But the Dodgers lost that World Series in 6 games to, you guessed it, the New York Yankees. And the Dodgers tried to force the situation in 1954, but fell just short to the New York Giants. And so it came down to Game 7 of the World Series in 1955. And if it was ever going to happen to the Brooklyn Dodgers, it really needed to happen now. Johnny Padres, the 23-year-old changeup specialist, started Game 7. He was assisted by a bizarre play here. Phil Rizzuto was called out after being hit by a batted ball for the 3rd out.
Rizzuto as he slides into the bag, and the base runner is out.
Roy Campanella started a Brooklyn rally in the 4th inning with this double to left field.
The left field corner for his team's first hit.
And Campanella gave the Dodgers a 1-0 lead when he scored on this single.
Campanella comes home when Hodges singles to left, and the Dodgers are out in front, 1-0.
But that 1-run lead likely was not going to be enough. I mean, these were still the Brooklyn Dodgers. That was apparent when the Dodgers misfielded this pop-up by Yogi Berra, but Padres managed to get out of that inning without any further damage. Then, with a man on first in the 6th, slugger Duke Snider decided to bunt and made this controversial play to knock the ball loose out of Moose Skowron's glove.
1-0.
So I'll never understand why Moose Skowron didn't, just like put his foot on the bag. It would have been a lot easier. Instead, Snider slapped the ball away and was safe at first base. What we have to remember is that Duke Snider gave up his chance to hit 5 home runs in a single World Series by bunting in that situation instead. He sacrificed the personal record for the good of the team. That's the part of this that we tend to forget about. Campanella bunted again.
Campanella moves the runners to 3rd and 2nd on a sacrifice bunt.
Then Gil Hodges hit this sacrifice fly, and the Dodgers scored another run in an inning that saw 3 sacrifices.
Bob serves, scoring Reese, and the Dodgers have a 2-0 lead.
Now, Yankee Stadium wasn't exactly a great hitter's park, though people these days tend to think that it was. It really wasn't. But it wasn't all certain that Johnny Padres could hold on, especially with all that slow junk he was throwing. So the Yankees wound up with runners on 1st and 2nd in the bottom of the 6th inning, and Yogi Berra came up. Sandy Amoros made this incredible catch, one of the most famous in World Series history.
Sandy Amoros races for the ball, sticks out his glove just in time, and makes the catch. And McDougal has
And it led to
rounded
this
second
unforgettable
base.
double play because Gil McDougal was so far off of first base.
And Reese's peg to Hodges doubles McDougal at first.
It really was a tremendous catch, and it was a real heads-up throw.
That double play is Brooklyn's 12th, the 19th of the World Series.
For years, this was remembered as one of the best World Series defensive plays of all time, though that was probably because of the tremendous pressure that the Dodgers were facing. And as you can see from this diagram, it was almost another Babe Herman situation, except this time the Yankees were the victims. That's the play that really gave you the sense that the Dodgers were actually going to do it this time around. And true to the tale, the New York Yankees really didn't give much of a threat for the rest of the ballgame. Padres managed to pitch his 2nd complete game of the World Series, and the Dodgers had finally beaten the curse.
And these Dodgers at last are world champions. Delirious with joy.
There finally seemed to be justice in the world. The Dodgers had finally managed to win it. And those bums weren't bums anymore. Now, beyond the fantastic story here, the other fantastic thing about this game and this team is the tremendous impact that some of those Dodgers pitchers had on the game of baseball in the long run. So you already know about Sandy Koufax, right? He didn't even pitch in that World Series. There was also this 18-year-old kid named Drysdale who was part of the franchise but was still up in Montreal. Carl Spooner, unfortunately, never pitched again in the major leagues after his quick exit in Game 6. But Roger Craig and Johnny Padres, they were something else. Johnny Padres had a long career as a major league pitching coach, specializing in teaching the art of the changeup. One of Padres' students was Frank Viola, whose stuff looked an awful lot like what Padres used to throw. But Roger Craig was even more famous. Craig had the misfortune of being the best pitcher on the 1962 and 1963 New York Mets, which meant that he lost a lot more games than he deserved to lose. In 1984, however, Craig's ability to teach the split-fingered fastball made a huge difference, as his Detroit Tigers were untouchable. Jack Morris went from an ordinary pitcher to a superstar with that split-fingered fastball.
Got him swinging, and he has his no-hitter.
But it was Mike Scott, a young pitcher who sought one-on-one pitching help from Roger Craig after the 1985 season, who made the old Dodger famous. Scott's pitches in 1986 were as close to unhittable as they come.
Strikeout number 2.
And so, in the end, there was at least some redemption for the young pitcher who kept running into bad luck. And all of that came thanks to members of the 1955 Brooklyn Dodgers. Now, it's been over 70 years now, and most people alive today don't remember just how incredible the 1955 World Series really was. But in the end, it's really one of those great stories of baseball history. The team that could never win, the team that was doomed to move away, the team that always fell short, wound up winning it in the end. And boy, did they win it in spectacular fashion.